The train screamed. It screamed like something was dying out there on the plains. A long, piercing shriek that cut right through the dusty air of Silver Creek. The whole town was a blister under the sun, a forgotten stop for forgotten people. Gamblers, drifters, folks running from something, and folks running toward nothing at all. When the iron beast finally ground to a halt, spitting steam and soot, the platform filled up and emptied out just as quick. People shuffled past, their eyes down, their faces hard. They didn't have time for other people's troubles. And that's why, when the dust settled and the last passenger had vanished into the grimy streets, nobody paid any mind to the tiny figure left standing there. A little girl, no bigger than a sack of flour, with hair the color of sun-scorched wheat and a tattered dress that had seen 100 too many washes. In her small hands, she gripped the handle of a beat-up suitcase like it was the only thing holding her to the earth. Her name was Emma, and she was completely, terrifyingly alone. Tucked into the handle of her suitcase was a note. The handwriting was a mess, scribbled in a hurry by someone who didn't want to stick around. It had just a few words, words that would burn themselves into her memory forever. "Wait here. Somebody will come for you." But underneath that, almost like an afterthought, were two more words. Or not. That was it. That was all her stepmother Mara had left her. That, and the cold, hollow feeling of being thrown away like trash. You see, in Silver Creek, a kid alone wasn't a tragedy. It was just a Tuesday. A man in a fancy hat stepped right over her. A couple of saloon girls laughed as they sashayed past. The station master just chewed his tobacco and stared right through her. In this town, children were either a tool or a burden, and Emma was starting to feel like she was both. The sun beat down, making the air shimmer. Her throat was sandpaper. Her stomach ached with a hunger so deep it felt like a part of her. But she didn't move. She just stood there waiting. Her eyes scanned every face, every wagon, every shadow, searching for the somebody she was promised. She wouldn't cry. Tears were a luxury. They were for people who thought someone else might care enough to wipe them away. Night came, and the town changed. The friendly heat of the day bled away, replaced by a bitter cold that crept in from the plains. The saloons lit up, spilling angry yellow light and the sound of shouting and broken glass onto the street. A gunshot cracked the air somewhere in the distance. Nobody even flinched. Emma shivered, pulling her thin dress tighter. The platform was empty now. The last train had roared away hours ago, taking with it the last sliver of her hope. She was alone with the shadows, and in Silver Creek, the shadows had teeth. She whispered the words from the note to herself. Somebody will come. It was a prayer to a God she wasn't sure was listening. She wouldn't sit down. Sitting felt like surrender. It felt like admitting she was just another piece of wreckage in this broken down town. As the first stars began to pop out in the endless, ink-black sky, a cold wind kicked up dust around her tiny feet. She was a ghost on that platform, a statue of forgotten promises. But as she stared into the oppressive darkness, she saw it. Something she hadn't noticed before, tucked into the broken clasp of her suitcase. It wasn't part of the note. It was a small, crudely carved wooden token. A little bird with a broken wing. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know who it was from. But as she clutched it in her hand, a flicker of defiance sparked inside her. Maybe her stepmother didn't leave it. Maybe it was from someone else, someone who was still out there. And she realized with a jolt of ice-cold fear, maybe the note wasn't just cruel. Maybe it was a warning. The sun rose like a blood orange, painting the sky in violent streaks of red and gold. Emma was still standing. Her legs were numb, her body stiff from the cold night, but her eyes were wide open. She hadn't slept a wink. Every creak of the old platform, every howl of a distant coyote had been a monster in the dark. Then she heard it, the steady, deliberate sound of a single horse. This wasn't a drunk stumbling home from the saloon or a merchant rushing to market. This was someone who owned the ground they rode on. A man on a massive black stallion emerged from the morning mist. He was tall, broad, wearing a long dusty coat that fell to his boots. A dark hat was pulled low, but it couldn't hide the scar. a wicked, jagged line that sliced from the corner of his left eye down to his jaw. This was Jack Callahan, and the whole town of Silver Creek was scared to death of him. He was a cattle baron, a man who owned more land than the church and had more enemies than the devil. He kept to himself out on his fortress of a ranch, a place where whispers said he drank alone and talked to ghosts. The scar, they said, was a reminder of the day he lost everything. Jack swung off his horse and tied the reins to a post, his movements economical and sharp. He was heading for the telegraph office. He didn't even seem to see her. But then he stopped. He saw the small figure hunched against the post, the battered suitcase, the empty platform. Their eyes met. Emma didn't cry out. She didn't beg. She just stared up at him, her gaze hollow, but with that one stubborn spark still burning deep inside. Something twisted in Jack's gut. He'd seen those eyes before, years ago, on his little sister, Annie, just before the bandits dragged her from the stagecoach. She'd been about Emma's age. Annie never came home, and Jack had been carrying that failure, that guilt, like a stone in his chest ever since. The scar on his face was nothing compared to the one on his soul. He looked away, forcing the memory down. He stomped into the telegraph office, sent his message about cattle prices, and tried to forget the girl outside. But he couldn't. The image of her, so small and so defiant, was seared into his mind. When he came back out, she was still there, waiting, for a train that wasn't coming, for a person who didn't exist. He was going to walk away. He really was. It wasn't his problem. The world was full of strays. But then the wind picked up, and for a second, just a second, he heard it, a whisper from the past, clear as a bell. "Don't leave me, Jackie." He cursed, a low, savage sound. He spun around, strode right up to her, and squatted down so they were eye to eye. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "What's your name, girl?" "Emma," she whispered. "Where are your folks?" She hesitated, then just a single word. "Gone." Jack knew that kind of gone. He stood up, ready to mount his horse, ready to ride away and forget he ever saw her. He got one foot in the stirrup, but he couldn't do it. He just couldn't. With another curse, he turned back. "Get up," he barked. "You're coming with me." Emma just blinked, her small face a mask of confusion. "Are you deaf?" he grumbled. "Move, or I'm leaving you and that ridiculous suitcase in the dust." She scrambled to her feet, her movements clumsy with exhaustion. He hoisted her up behind him on the saddle. She was so light he barely felt her there. But the weight on his conscience was heavier than a mountain. As they rode through the main street, curtains twitched in windows. People stopped and stared. Callahan? With a kid? The whispers followed them like flies. He ignored them all, his jaw set like granite. He didn't know why he was doing this. Maybe it was for Annie. Maybe it was because he saw the same stubborn fire in this little girl that he had tried so hard to stamp out in himself. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because he saw that little wooden token clutched in her fist. The one carved like a bird with a broken wing. He had one just like it, tucked away in a box with all his other ghosts. His father had carved them, one for him and one for Annie, the day before the stagecoach attack. And suddenly, this wasn't just about a stray. This was about a debt. And Jack Callahan always paid his debts. The Callahan Ranch wasn't a home. It was a fortress. It spread out under the vast empty sky, a kingdom of dust and barbed wire. The main house was big and imposing, built from thick timber that had been bleached by the sun and battered by the wind. It looked like it had grown right out of the unforgiving earth. As Jack rode through the main gate, a huge iron arch with a C branded into it, a few ranch hands stopped what they were doing to stare. They saw the grim look on their boss's face, and they saw the small, terrified girl clinging to his back. Nobody said a word. You didn't ask Jack Callahan questions you didn't want answered with the butt of a gun. He dismounted in front of the main house and lifted Emma down. She stumbled, her legs still asleep. A wiry man with a face like a dried-up creek bed and a perpetual scowl ambled over. "This is Hank," Jack said, his voice flat. "He's my foreman. Hank, this is Emma. She's staying." Hank spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. He looked Emma up and down, his eyes cold and assessing. "You sure about that, boss?" Did I ask for your opinion? Jack shot back. Hank just shrugged and walked away. That was that. Jack led Emma inside. The house was dark and smelled of old leather, whiskey, and gunpowder. Antlers were mounted on the walls, their points like daggers in the dim light. He showed her to a small room upstairs. It was little more than a closet with a bed and a single window that looked out over the endless, empty plains. You sleep here, he said. You earn your keep. You don't cause trouble. Understand? Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Good, he grunted. Supper's at sundown. Don't be late. He turned and left, the door closing behind him with a heavy, final thud. She was alone again. She walked over to the window and looked out. There was nothing, just miles and miles of brown grass and blue sky. Was this a rescue, or was it just a bigger cage? The first few days were a blur of fear and confusion. The ranch hands ignored her, or worse, they'd snicker when she walked by. They called her Callahan's ghost. She tried to make herself useful, sweeping floors that were already clean, feeding chickens that scattered every time she got close. But she watched, and she listened. There was Caleb, a mountain of a man with hands as big as dinner plates, but a voice as gentle as a summer breeze. He saw her trying to get near the horses and took pity on her. He showed her how to speak to them, how to hold out a hand, so they knew she wasn't a threat. There was Rosa, the cook, a woman whose tongue was as sharp as her knives, but whose eyes held a flicker of warmth. She saw how thin Emma was and started leaving out extra biscuits for her, pretending she'd made too many. A gust of wind could blow you away, child, she'd mutter. Slowly, Emma started to learn the rhythms of the ranch. The pre-dawn bustle, the long, hot afternoons, the quiet evenings when the men would sit on the porch, cleaning their guns and telling low, gruff stories. But she never felt safe. Every time Jack Callahan walked into a room, a cold knot of fear would tighten in her stomach. He was a phantom in his own home, moving through the halls with a heavy, silent tread. He never spoke to her unless he had to. And his eyes were always looking at something far away, something that haunted him. At night she'd lie awake in her little room, listening to the house creak and groan. She never fully unpacked her suitcase. She kept her few meager belongings folded neatly inside, ready to leave at a moment's notice. Kindness was a trick. A smile was a warning. Her stepmother had smiled right before she left her to rot. One evening she was sitting on the back steps, watching the sun bleed across the horizon, when Jack came out. He was holding a glass of whiskey, and he moved to the far end of the porch, keeping his distance. They sat in silence for a long time, just two lonely figures against a dying sky. You planning on running off? He asked suddenly, his voice startling her. She shook her head. He let out a short, dry chuckle. Good. Nowhere to run to out here. He took a long swallow of his whiskey. He looked out at the vast emptiness, and for a moment, the hard lines on his face seemed to soften. This land, it takes things from you, he said, more to himself than to her. It took my sister. Emma stayed quiet. She knew he was talking about Annie. But it gives you something back too, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. It gives you a place to bury your ghosts. He finished his drink, the glass clinking as he set it down. He looked over at her, his eyes unreadable in the twilight. Don't unpack that suitcase, and he said. Emma's heart sank. This was it. He was kicking her out. Not yet, he added, his gaze turning sharp. Not until we know who else is looking for that little wooden bird of yours. Emma's hand flew to her pocket, where she kept the token. How did he know? How could he possibly know about it? Jack just gave a slow, grim nod, as if confirming something to himself. Get some sleep, girl, he said, turning to go back inside. The trouble ain't over. It's just getting started. News travels fast in a place like Silver Creek. It travels on whispers in the saloon, on sideways glances in the general store, on the hot, dry wind that blows through the dusty streets. And the news about Jack Callahan and the little girl he'd plucked off the train platform was the juiciest gossip they'd had in years. Heard he's finally lost his mind, one gambler slurred over his cards, bringing a kid out to that boneyard of a ranch. Nah, another one countered. I heard she's his, a secret bastard child come back to haunt him. The bartender, a man who heard everything, just polished a glass and smirked. You're all wrong. The girl's a nobody, a stray, but that's what makes it interesting. A man like Callahan don't do nothing for free. He's got a reason. The whispers twisted and coiled, turning from curiosity to suspicion, and then to something darker. A man like that, all alone with a little girl? It just wasn't right. And all those whispers, they eventually found their way to the right pair of ears. Or in this case, the wrong ones. In the back of the grimmiest saloon in town, a woman sat hunched over a glass of cheap whiskey. Her face was hard, her eyes were like chips of ice, and she was listening to every word. It was Mara, Emma's stepmother. She'd been laying low, waiting for the dust to settle, figuring the girl would either be dead or gone by now. But this was something else. A rich rancher, a recluse with a dark past, a greedy, crooked smile spread across her face. This wasn't a problem. This was an opportunity. A big one. A few days later, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, heading straight for the Callahan ranch. Hank saw it first, his eyes narrowing. "Rider coming, boss." Jack was on the porch in an instant, his hand resting casually on the Colt at his hip. He watched as the lone figure got closer. It was a woman, riding hard. It was Mara. She pulled her horse to a stop and dismounted, her boots sinking into the dry dirt. She tried to plaster a sweet motherly smile on her face, but it didn't reach her cold, dead eyes. "I've come for my daughter," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Jack didn't move a muscle. "You mean the one you threw away like a piece of garbage?" Mara's smile faltered for a second. "I made a mistake. A mother's heart's a complicated thing. I want her back." "No," Jack said. The word was flat, final. Mara's fake sweetness evaporated. The venom underneath was showing now. "She is legally my ward. I have papers, and I have friends. Friends who wouldn't like to hear about a lonely, wealthy man keeping a little girl all to himself out here in the middle of nowhere." It was blackmail, pure and simple. From the window of the main house, Emma watched, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw that face, that cruel smile, and the terror was so intense it almost made her sick. Jack took a slow step off the porch. "You're not taking her." "Oh, I think I am," Mara sneered. "Or things are going to get very, very ugly for you, Mr. Callahan. People are already talking. A word from me in the right ear. Say to Sheriff Tate, and he might just decide to pay you a visit." Sheriff Tate, a man known to be more crooked than a dog's hind leg, a man who could be bought. "Get off my land," Jack said, his voice a low growl. "This isn't over," Mara hissed. She climbed back on her horse, her face a mask of fury. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." She galloped away, leaving a trail of dust and threats hanging in the air. That night, the ranch was on high alert. The gates were barred, the rifles were loaded, and the dogs growled at every shadow. Emma couldn't sleep. She sat in her little room, clutching the wooden bird, the world feeling like it was closing in on her. Later, she crept downstairs. She found Jack in his study, a map of the ranch spread out on his desk. He was staring at it, but his mind was somewhere else. "She's coming back, isn't she?" Emma asked, her voice a small whisper in the big dark room. Jack looked up. He didn't lie to her. "Yeah, she is." "Why does she want me now?" Jack leaned back in his chair, his face grim in the lamplight. "It's not about you, Emma. It's about this." He tapped the wooden bird that Emma had, without realizing, placed on his desk. "That token," he said, his voice low and heavy with memory. "It was a symbol. My father carved them for me and my sister. But they were also a key." Emma stared at him, confused. "A key to what?" Jack looked her straight in the eye. "My father wasn't just a rancher. He had a secret, a silver mine, hidden somewhere on this land. One of the richest strikes in the territory. He was partners with a man he trusted." He paused, the silence stretching out. "That man betrayed him, ambushed him and my sister on the road. He killed my father and took Annie. I was just a boy. I couldn't stop them." His hand unconsciously went to the scar on his face. "This was a gift from him, to remember. The tokens," he continued, "are the two halves of the map to that mine. Mara must have found your mother's and figured out what it was. She doesn't just want you, Emma. She wants a fortune. Suddenly it all made sense. The abandonment, the sudden return, the threats. It was never about her. It was about greed. Who was he? Emma breathed. Your father's partner. Jack's eyes turned hard as stone. A snake named Jed Colston, the man who leads the most vicious gang of outlaws this side of the mountains. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the blackness. Mara isn't coming back with the law, Emma. She's coming back with an army. And they're not just coming to get you. They're coming to burn this whole place to the ground. The threat hung in the air for 3 days. 3 days of waiting, of watching the horizon, of sleeping with one eye open. The ranch became an armed camp. Every man had a rifle at the ready. The quiet rhythm of daily life was replaced by a tense, nervous energy. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching horses. On the 3rd day, Mara returned. But she wasn't riding a horse this time. She was in a fancy black carriage, the kind a rich banker might own. And sitting next to her, looking smug and comfortable, was Sheriff Tate. They pulled up to the front gate, and the sheriff held up a hand. "We're here on official business, Callahan," he yelled. Jack walked out to meet them, Hank and Caleb right behind him, their hands on their guns. "What do you want, Tate?" Jack asked, his voice cold. "Mara here has filed a legal claim," the sheriff said, waving a piece of paper. "Says you're holding her legal ward against her will. This paper gives me the authority to search your property and return the girl to her rightful guardian." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. The paper was probably not worth the ink it was printed on. But Tate had a badge, and he had 3 deputies with him, all of them looking nervous but ready for a fight. "The girl's not going anywhere," Jack stated. Mara leaned out of the carriage window, a triumphant sneer on her face. "You see, Callahan? You can't fight the law. It's over. Give me the girl and the map, and we'll be on our way." "Map?" the sheriff asked, looking at Mara with a flicker of confusion. Mara's eyes widened for a second, realizing her slip. "He knows what I mean," she said quickly. But the damage was done. Jack saw the look on the sheriff's face. Tate was here for the girl, for the bounty Mara promised him. He didn't know anything about a silver mine. Mara was playing everyone. "There is no map," Jack said, his eyes locked on the sheriff. "This woman is a liar and a kidnapper. She abandoned that child. You know it, and I know it." "All I know is what this paper says," Tate blustered, his hand drifting toward his own gun. "Now stand aside." It was a standoff. The air was thick with tension, seconds stretching into an eternity. Emma watched from the house, her stomach in knots. She saw the deputies shifting their weight, their trigger fingers getting itchy. Then something happened that no one expected. Hank, Jack's foreman, the man who'd been with him for years, took a half step forward. "Boss," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "just give him the girl. It ain't worth all this." Jack stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. "What did you say?" "She's just one kid," Hank continued, his eyes darting nervously toward the sheriff. "It ain't worth getting us all killed over. Just let him have her." It was a betrayal, so sudden, so shocking it felt like a punch to the gut. Hank had been bought, or maybe he was just a coward. Either way, he had just chosen his side. The sheriff smiled. "See, Callahan? Even your own men have sense. Now for the last time." But Jack wasn't looking at the sheriff. He was looking at Hank. The hurt in his eyes was quickly replaced by a cold, hard fury. "Get behind me, Caleb," Jack said, his voice dangerously low. The standoff had just become something else entirely. It wasn't just them against the world anymore. The enemy was also inside the gates. And just as the tension reached its breaking point, a new sound cut through the air. A low whistle from the hills to the east. It was a signal. Sheriff Tate's head whipped around, a look of pure panic on his face. He wasn't expecting this. Mara, however, smiled. This was her real plan. This was her ace in the hole. From over the ridge, a dozen riders appeared. They were hard-looking men, armed to the teeth, and at their lead was a man with cold, snake-like eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. A man Jack Callahan knew all too well. Jed Colston. The outlaws charged down the hill, guns already blazing. The deputies, caught completely by surprise, scattered in panic. This wasn't the easy job they'd signed up for. "What is this, Mara?" the sheriff shrieked, diving for cover behind the carriage. "Insurance," she cackled. "You didn't really think I'd trust you, did you?" The battle for Callahan Ranch had begun, and Jack was caught between a corrupt lawman, a gang of killers, and a traitor in his own ranks. The world exploded into a storm of lead and chaos. Gunfire erupted from all sides, the air filled with the deafening roar of rifles and the whistle of bullets. Jed Colston's men were professionals. They fanned out, using the terrain for cover, laying down a relentless field of fire. Sheriff Tate and his deputies were useless, pinned down and terrified. This wasn't a simple arrest. This was a war zone. "Fall back to the house!" Jack yelled to Caleb, shoving him toward the porch. He fired 2 quick shots from his Colt, dropping one of the charging outlaws from his saddle. But where was Hank? Jack glanced back just in time to see his foreman making a run for the barn, not to fight, but to escape. The coward was saving his own skin. There was no time to deal with him now. Jack and Caleb scrambled onto the porch, bullets splintering the wood around them. "Get inside! Bar the door!" Jack ordered. Inside, Rosa was already pulling Emma away from the windows, her face pale with fear. "Get down, child! Stay down!" The house itself seemed to groan under the assault. Bullets punched through the walls, shattering glass and sending splinters flying. It was a death trap. They couldn't stay here. "The cellar!" Jack yelled. "Rosa, get Emma to the cellar!" As Rosa hurried Emma toward the trap door in the kitchen floor, Caleb slumped against the wall, a dark stain spreading across his pant leg. "I'm hit, boss," he grunted, his face tight with pain. Jack cursed, ripping a piece of cloth from a curtain to press against the wound. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and now one of his only 2 loyal men was down. Meanwhile, outside, the situation was getting even worse. Jed Colston wasn't just attacking the house. He'd sent a few of his men to the barn, not to find the traitor Hank, but for something else. They were setting it on fire. Flames began to lick up the dry timber of the old barn, smoke billowing into the sky. They were being smoked out, trapped. From the cellar grate, Emma could see the orange glow. She could smell the smoke. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was it. This was the end. But Jack Callahan wasn't a man who knew how to surrender. "Stay with him," he ordered Rosa, pointing to the wounded Caleb. Then he looked at Emma. His face was grim, streaked with gunpowder and sweat. "Emma," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, "do you trust me?" She looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had been so cold and distant just days ago. Now they were filled with a fierce, protective fire. She nodded. "Good," he said. He pulled something from his pocket. It was his own wooden token, the other half of the map. He pressed it into her hand alongside hers. "Don't lose these, no matter what." "What are you going to do?" she whispered. A grim smile touched his lips. "Something stupid." He crawled over to the far side of the room, to the huge stone fireplace that dominated the wall. He began to pry at one of the stones near the base. It came loose, revealing a dark, hollow space behind it. A tunnel. An old escape route he'd built years ago, just in case. "It leads out to the creek bed, 100 yards from the house," he explained quickly. "Rosa, when I give the signal, you take Caleb and the girl and you run. Don't stop for anything. Head north. You'll find shelter in the old caves." "What about you?" Rosa cried. "I'm going to give them a distraction," he said. He checked his revolver, his movements quick and precise. He had 4 bullets left. He grabbed a box of dynamite he'd stashed under the floorboards and a length of fuse. He was going to make a final stand. He knew he probably wasn't going to walk away from this, but he could buy them time. He could give Emma a chance he never got for his own sister. "Go!" he urged them, pushing them toward the tunnel. "Now!" Rosa helped a groaning Caleb through the opening. Emma hesitated, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to leave him. "I'll be right behind you," he lied. She squeezed the wooden tokens in her hand and scrambled into the darkness of the tunnel, following the others. Jack took a deep breath. He listened to the gunfire outside, the shouts of the outlaws, the roar of the burning barn. He lit the fuse on a stick of dynamite. Then he kicked down the front door and walked out onto the porch, straight into the storm. "Colston!" he roared, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "You want me? Come and get me." For a moment, the shooting stopped. Every eye turned to the lone figure on the porch, a lit stick of dynamite in one hand, a revolver in the other. He was a terrifying sight, a man with nothing left to lose. And from her hiding place near the creek, Emma watched in horror. She couldn't run. She couldn't leave him to die alone. But then she saw it, a movement in the shadows near the burning barn. It was Hank, the traitor. He wasn't running away. He was sneaking up behind Jed Colston, a long hunting knife clutched in his hand. Hank wasn't a coward. He was playing a different game, and the entire battle was about to be turned on its head. Hank moved like a predator. While all eyes were on Jack's suicidal stand on the porch, the foreman slipped through the chaos, his face a mask of pure, cold concentration. He wasn't a coward running away. He was a snake waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His betrayal hadn't been for money. It hadn't been for Mara. It had been for revenge. You see, years ago, before Hank worked for Callahan, he had a family, a wife and a son. They were on a stagecoach, the same stagecoach that Jed Colston's gang had ambushed, the same one where Annie Callahan had been taken. Hank's wife and son hadn't been so lucky. They died in the crossfire. For a decade, Hank had been hunting Colston, waiting for a chance to get close. He'd taken the job with Callahan, knowing that trouble followed Jack like a shadow, and sooner or later, that shadow would be Jed Colston. His betrayal was a calculated act, a way to get the outlaws to lower their guard, to let him get close enough. Now was his chance. As Jed stood there, mesmerized by Jack's insane bluff with the dynamite, Hank lunged from the shadows. He drove the hunting knife deep into Colston's back, right between the shoulder blades. Jed let out a strangled, inhuman roar of pain and surprise. He stumbled forward, his gun falling from his hand, his eyes wide with disbelief as he turned to see the face of the man who had just killed him. Hank didn't say a word. He just pulled the knife free and melted back into the shadows. The outlaws were stunned. Their leader was down, gurgling his last breath in the dirt. The momentary pause was all Jack needed. The dynamite wasn't a bluff. He hurled the lit stick not at the outlaws, but at the carriage where Mara and Sheriff Tate were cowering. The explosion was immense, flipping the carriage into the air like a child's toy. The sheriff was thrown clear, landing in a broken heap, but Mara was trapped in the wreckage. The gang, leaderless and panicked, broke. Some tried to fight, but without Jed's command, they were just a disorganized mob. Jack picked off 2 of them with his remaining bullets. From the creek bed, Emma watched, her mind reeling. And then she saw him. Caleb, the big, gentle ranch hand, had pulled himself up, leaning against a rock. He'd gotten his hands on the rifle Rosa had been carrying. With a grimace of pain, he lifted the weapon, took careful aim, and began to pick off the fleeing outlaws with methodical precision. He might have been wounded, but he could still shoot. The tide had turned completely. The remaining outlaws scrambled for their horses and fled into the night, a scattered, broken remnant of what was once a fearsome gang. Silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the crackle of the still-burning barn and the moans of the wounded. Jack stood on the porch, chest heaving, his body screaming with exhaustion. He had survived. They had survived. He saw Hank emerge from the shadows, his face grim, the bloody knife still in his hand. Their eyes met across the yard. No words were needed. Jack understood. He just gave a single, slow nod of respect. Hank had done what he had to do. His long hunt was finally over. Then Jack's eyes found Emma, peeking out from the rocks by the creek. He started toward her, his legs unsteady. But as he walked past the smoldering wreckage of the carriage, a hand shot out and grabbed his ankle. It was Mara. She was mangled, burned, but somehow still alive. Her face was a twisted mask of hatred, her eyes burning with a mad fire. "It's not over," she rasped, her nails digging into his boot. "The mine is mine." She was holding a small silver pistol, raising it shakily to point at his chest. But before she could pull the trigger, another sound cut the air. Not a gunshot, a thwack, a rock. A small, sharp rock, thrown with surprising force, struck Mara square in the temple. Her eyes rolled back in her head, the gun fell from her limp fingers, and she collapsed, finally silenced for good. Jack looked up. Standing by the creek, her arms still outstretched, was Emma. Her face was tear-streaked and smudged with dirt, but her expression was fierce. She wasn't the scared little girl from the train station anymore. She had saved his life. He walked over to her, his heart too full for words. He knelt down in front of her, the same way he had on the platform what felt like a lifetime ago. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms. And for the first time since her mother died, Emma let herself cry. She collapsed into his embrace, the wooden tokens digging into her palm, and she cried for everything she had lost, and for the one impossible thing she had just found, a home. The sun that rose over Callahan Ranch the next morning felt different. It wasn't the harsh, unforgiving glare of before. It was warm, gentle, like a promise. The smoke had cleared, and in the clean morning light, the scars on the land were laid bare. The barn was a blackened skeleton. The yard was littered with the debris of the fight, but the house was still standing, and so were its people. Sheriff Tate was rounded up, his leg broken and his career in ruins. Hank helped Jack and Caleb bury the dead, both friend and foe. His face was empty, the fire of vengeance that had fueled him for a decade finally extinguished. There was nothing left but ashes. He would leave the ranch the next day, a ghost heading off into the sunrise with no destination in mind. Caleb was laid up in the house, grumbling but alive, with Rosa fussing over him like a mother hen, and Emma. Emma was quiet. She sat on the porch steps, watching Jack as he surveyed the damage. He looked old, tired, the weight of the battle and the years pressing down on him. She walked over and stood beside him, holding out the 2 wooden tokens. "The map," she said softly. He looked down at them, then back at her. He shook his head. "It's not a map, Emma. Not really." He took the 2 tokens from her and fitted them together. They clicked into place perfectly, but they didn't form a map. On one side was the carving of the bird with the broken wing. On the other side, when joined, they formed a single, perfect image, the Callahan C brand. "My father lied about the silver mine," Jack said, his voice thick with an old sadness. "There was never any treasure. He made up the story to lure Jed Coulston into a trap. He knew Jed was coming for him, for the ranch. He was trying to protect us, to end the threat for good. He looked out at the land his father had died for. It didn't work. It just got him and Annie killed. And I've been fighting his war ever since." Emma looked at the joined tokens in his hand. It wasn't about a silver mine. It was never about money. It was about family, about legacy, about protecting what was yours. "He didn't fail," Emma said, her voice small but clear. "He was just early. You finished the fight for him." Jack looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not the ghost of his sister, but Emma. Fierce, brave, stubborn Emma. The girl who had survived abandonment, who had faced down outlaws, who had saved his life with a well-aimed rock. A slow smile spread across his face. It was a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes and softened the jagged line of his scar. "Yeah," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I guess we did." He took a folded, official-looking document from his pocket. It was crumpled and had a bit of blood on the corner, but the words were still clear. Adoption papers. He'd sent for them days ago. "I was going to do this proper," he said gruffly, a hint of embarrassment in his tone. "Sign the papers, make it legal. But I reckon we've been through more than any piece of paper could ever make official." He looked at her, his heart in his throat. "This ranch, it's as much yours as it is mine now, Emma. If you want it." Emma didn't need a piece of paper. She didn't need a new name. She looked at the weathered house, at the wounded man beside her, at the endless plains stretching out before them. This wasn't just a place. It was a feeling, the feeling of being home. She leaned her head against his side, and they stood there together, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The ghosts of the past were finally quiet. The war was over, out here in the wild, unforgiving West. Family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you fought for, something you bled for, something you built from the ashes. And on that quiet morning, Under the vast and peaceful sky, the Callahan Ranch had a future again. It was a future built on courage, paid for in blood, and sealed by the unbreakable bond between a broken man and the little girl who had taught him how to live again. They had a long road ahead, rebuilding what they had lost, but they would do it together, because that's what family does. If you enjoyed this story and you believe that home isn't just a place you find, but something you're willing to fight for, then you're in the right place. Stories like this, about finding light in the darkest of corners, are what we're all about. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the past is full of ghosts and every single one of them has a story to tell. You won't want to miss the next one.